The recent announcement of Borderlands 3 Ultimate Edition for the Nintendo Switch has sparked a lot of online discussions and debates on how it will run, and many people conveniently forgetting the Switch already has stellar ports of the other games of the franchise. So I thought it'd be a good time to go to Borderlands 3 on Valve's PC handheld and see how well it can fare, as well as take a look at what Switch owners can look forward to, at least in the game itself. So let's dive right in. Here is how the Steam Deck can run Borderlands 3. For a brief summary, this is a sequel to Borderlands 1 and 2, a looter-shooter RPG centered around a conflict between a cultist group searching for a supposed Great Vault and a resistance led by Lilith, the siren character from Borderlands 1 that also had a pretty big role in Borderlands 2. Now to start things off, a couple little FYI notes. Proton doesn't really affect performance, or at least it didn't for me when I tested around with Proton 7, 8, and Experimental. The DirectX 11 versus DirectX 12 modes also didn't really change much for me, though we do have a couple little inconveniences here. Borderlands 3 requires a bit of patience because it takes a while to actually boot up and load. Every time I start the game, it almost seems like I get stuck on the claptrap loading screen before the title menu, but given a few minutes and it will eventually launch. The second thing is a bit situational with those that like using a dock for the Steam Deck. If you use a third-party controller via Bluetooth, you might not be able to use it here. I always have a DualSense controller paired to my Steam Deck when it's in its dock, and my controllers are never recognized in Borderlands 3. They can still go to the deck UI, change control schematics and whatnot, but never do a thing in-game. Thankfully, the deck's built-in controls work beautifully even when it's plugged into a dock. Now let's dive into performance. You won't get perfection on high settings, but you can make this game work. And as with many others, it depends on what you want out of the game, mostly between 30 FPS or 60. I would include 40 here too, but you don't really have many options between 30 and 60. Now, of course, internal areas will perform better than others, so I stuck to the more open world areas for my testing. Though unfortunately, due to no one ever being able to publicly matchmake with me during my testing sessions, I was not able to test the co-op multiplayer's impact on performance. And as we get into the different graphical settings, one thing I will note about this game is that it transitions when you change the graphical presets. When you swap from one to another, the game will run at a lower frame rate for the first minute or two. So if you change to low and are seeing drops to 35 and 40, give it a minute and it will eventually stabilize at 60 to show you the actual performance. Now on to the topic at hand. High settings is out of the question, and really medium settings is also kind of out of the question if you want something smooth. But we'll talk about medium for a moment just for the sake of it. A lot of the time with medium settings, the frame rate will stick around the 50 to 60 range, but you do get a lot of stuttery drops when wandering around that will drop into the 30s and 40s a lot, and occasional down to 21. Even putting in settings to force the game to match your refresh rate won't get rid of these drops into the 20s. Then we have low settings. At the start of the game, this seemed to be the go-to for the deck, at least with internal areas. In the open world though, you'll stick around 60 FPS most of the time, but have regular dips into the mid to high 50s. I mean, it's pretty good, just not perfect. So that brings us to very low settings. This is the sweet spot if you want 60 FPS. You won't get a completely stable 60, but it will be there for almost the entire time, occasionally dropping into the high 50s around 58 and 59. Like many other games, if you don't have an FPS counter up on screen, you probably won't even notice. And all of this comes back to what you want. People that want a 60 FPS experience will want very low settings, while you could stick to low if you want to lock the deck down to 40 or even 30. And the latter many handheld fans may want to do because that's definitely going to be what they're aiming for with the Switch version that's coming out next month. That's all I got for performance, so let's go into battery life. You don't get a whole lot here. High brightness will give Borderlands 3 about an hour and 40 minutes, while lower brightness will give you slightly above 2 hours. Now to wrap this up, would I recommend this to Steam Deck users? Yeah, absolutely. While it does take pretty low settings to keep the frame rate up at 60, it's still pretty accessible and can run very well for taking this looter-shooter RPG on the go. While there are some little inconveniences like a longer boot up time and the Bluetooth controller weirdness, I've had a lot of fun playing this game in anticipation for its Switch release in October. And that's all I have for you today. I'll be back soon with more Steam Deck performance and reviews. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.